When last we sailed with them, the Straw Hats had come down out of the sky with a hold full of gold and a new friend named Nico Robin quietly reading her books on the deck. But two shadows sailed with them now, unspoken. The first was the little Going Mary herself, the ship that had carried them since the very beginning, battered by the Grand Line in the sky, groaning now with every wave, quietly dying beneath their feet. The second was Robin's own secret, that she was the last person alive who could read the forbidden stones of history, hunted since childhood by the whole of the world, and that she had never once, in all her long life, believed that anyone truly wanted her to live. Both of those shadows were about to come to a head in a single city, a magnificent city built on the water, home to the finest shipwrights in the world, and, hidden beneath its canals, to the most dangerous assassins the government had ever made. This is the story of the friend who nearly slipped away, the ship that gave everything, and the day a crew of 7 pirates declared war on the entire world for the sake of one woman. This is the saga of Water 7 and Ennies Lobby. Water 7 was a wonder, a great city rising out of the sea, threaded with canals instead of streets, where people traveled by gondola and by galley, and where the world's greatest shipbuilders plied their trade. The Straw Hats came here for one heartbreaking reason. Their gold from the sky was meant to repair the Going Mary, or, if it could not be repaired, to buy a new ship. And almost the moment they arrived, the money itself became a problem. A chunk of their fortune was snatched by a gang of rough dismantlers and bounty hunters called the Frankie family, led by a loud, strange, cyborg shipwright named Frankie. Chasing the stolen gold split the crew across the city and set everything else in motion. Water 7 had a history that ran beneath everything, quiet as its canals. Years before, the city's greatest shipwright had been a legendary fisherman named Tom, a master craftsman so gifted he had once built the ship of the pirate king himself, which the government considered a capital crime. Tom had been spared execution on a single condition, that he build the sea train, the great iron locomotive that runs across the very surface of the ocean, linking Water 7 to the islands beyond. He had 2 apprentices who loved him like a father, a sharp, level-headed boy named Iceberg and a wild, brilliant, hot-tempered boy named Cutty Flam. But the government came back for Tom in the end, over a set of ancient blueprints for a doomsday weapon that he was set to guard, and in the disaster that followed, Tom was taken away to die, and young Cutty Flam was believed killed trying to stop the train that carried his master off. Iceberg grew up to become the mayor of Water 7 and the head of its shipwrights, quietly hiding those same terrible blueprints so that no one could ever use them, and Cutty Flam had not died at all. Grievously broken, he had rebuilt his own body into a cyborg with his own 2 hands, taken the name Frankie, and become the loud, ridiculous, half-mad boss of a gang of ship dismantlers. Carrying, locked away in his memory, the one secret the whole world was about to go to war over. There was also a kindly, hard-drinking old woman known as Kokoro who ran the little sea train station, and who had loved Tom too. She and her small granddaughter would matter more before the end than anyone expected. The heart of Water 7 was the Galila Company, the elite shipwrights, and their beloved boss, a sharp, kind-eyed man named Iceberg, who was also the city's mayor. When the crew finally brought the wounded Going Mary to galley, Law's master craftsman to be saved, they were given a verdict that broke Usopp's heart in 2. The ship's keel, its spine, the single most important timber in any vessel, was cracked beyond any hope of repair. No shipwright in the world could fix it. To sail on, the Going Mary would have to be abandoned, and a new ship bought in her place. To Luffy, who loved the ship but understood the sea, the answer was painful but plain: the Mary could not go on. To Usopp, who had patched and repaired and cared for that ship with his own hands since Syrup Village, who had lived on her and bled on her, the Mary was not a thing to be replaced. She was family. And you do not throw family away because they are old and hurt. And then, quietly, in the middle of all of it, Nico Robin vanished. She slipped away from the crew without a word, and word came back that she had been seen conspiring with strange government agents, and even that she had taken part in a terrible crime. The friend they had fought a warlord to save seemed impossibly to have betrayed them. The truth came out on a night of knives. Someone broke into Iceberg's home and shot him down, and left behind a mask the Straw Hats had been seen wearing, a frame-up, clean and cruel, that turned the whole city against them and set every shipwright in Water 7 hunting them through the flooded streets. But as the crew fought to clear their names, the real culprits peeled off their disguises, one by one, and the horror of it landed all at once. The trusted galley la foreman, the prim young secretary, the easygoing bartender who ran a pub across the canal. They were not craftsmen or servants at all. They were Cipher Pole Number 9, a unit so secret that most of the government denied it even existed. Assassins raised and trained from childhood, granted a license to kill anyone at all in the name of justice. For 5 long years they had lived in Water 7 behind false faces, patient as spiders, and now they had finally struck. To seize the Pluton blueprints that Iceberg guarded, and to take Nico Robin, whose eyes were the last in all the world that could read the ancient stones. Robin had gone with them without a struggle, and had let her friends believe she had turned on them, because CP9 had promised her one thing in exchange, the lives of the Straw Hats. That night, someone tried to assassinate Iceberg, and the evidence pointed straight at the Straw Hats, and at Robin, who had been seen at the scene. The truth was far darker, and it had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Among Iceberg's most trusted galley la foreman and the sweet secretary and a cheerful bartender across town were the members of Cipher Pole Number 9, CP9, the most secret and most lethal of the world government's intelligence agencies, a unit of assassins granted the right to kill anyone in the name of justice. For years they had lived undercover in Water 7, and now they had moved. They were after 2 things: a set of ancient blueprints for a legendary weapon of mass destruction called Pluton, which they believed Iceberg was hiding, and Nico Robin, the one person alive who could read the history the government had spent 800 years burying. CP9 were no ordinary fighters. They had mastered a set of superhuman body techniques called the 6 Powers. Running faster than the eye could follow, kicking blades of air across a room, hardening their skin against blades and bullets, striking with a fingertip like a spear. Their leader in the field, a quiet, elegant man named Rob Lucci, who spoke through a little pigeon on his shoulder and had lived for years as Iceberg's most loyal foreman, was one of the most dangerous men the crew would ever face. Robin, it turned out, had not betrayed them at all. CP9 had made her a bargain, and it was the cruelest bargain of her life: surrender herself to the government and go quietly to her execution, and they would spare the Straw Hats. Believing, as she always had, that she was a curse on everyone she loved, that everyone who ever got close to her ended up dead, Robin took the deal without hesitation. She would die if it meant her new friends could live. She walked away from them on purpose, letting them think the worst of her, because she thought that was the kindest thing she could do. CP9 took her, and the blueprints, and boarded the great sea train bound for the government stronghold at Ennies lobby, where a warship and an executioner waited. But there was one more wound to come, and it was between friends. Usopp, gutted by the loss of the Mary and by his own sense of weakness, did something none of them expected. He challenged Luffy. He shouted that if the crew was going to throw the Going Mary away, then he would leave the crew and keep her himself. It became a real fight, out in the street, 2 friends swinging at each other with everything they had. Luffy won because he had to. A captain who could not defend his own decision had no right to make it. And Usopp, beaten and weeping and too proud to take it back, left the Straw Hat Pirates. It was one of the loneliest nights the crew had ever known, their archaeologist stolen away to die, their sniper gone, and their beloved ship condemned. To understand why Robin was so willing to die, you have to go back 20 years, to a quiet island called Ohara, and to the single most important secret in the entire world. Ohara was an island of scholars, archaeologists who devoted their lives to studying the poneglyphs, those indestructible stones scattered across the world, carved with a lost script that recorded the true history of an age the world's rulers had erased. There is a gap in the history of this world, 100 years, some 8 centuries ago, that the world government has made it a crime even to research, the void century. Something happened in those 100 years that the rulers of the world would kill and kill and kill again to keep buried. And the scholars of O'Hara, quietly, patiently, over generations, had begun to piece it together. Among them was a brilliant archaeologist named Nico Olvia, Robin's mother, and her own daughter, a lonely, gifted little girl of 8 who could already read the ancient stones better than scholars 3 times her age. Robin's childhood had been a lonely one even before the fire came. Her mother, Olvia, had sailed away on a dangerous voyage to study the world's forbidden history when Robin was only a toddler, and the little girl grew up an orphan among grown scholars, teased for being odd and too clever, aching for a family that was always somewhere out beyond the horizon. Her one true friend in those last days was the giant Saul, a defected marine who had washed up half-drowned on her shore and who simply could not stop laughing, a big, warm, ridiculous laugh, and who set himself, gently and stubbornly, to teaching the too serious little girl that even in a hard and frightening world a person ought to learn how to laugh. And her mother did come home to her, in the very end, for a single hour in the middle of the island's destruction, long enough to find her daughter in the chaos and hold her once and tell her that she was loved, before the 2 of them were torn apart forever. Robin had a mother's arms around her for exactly 1 hour of her whole childhood, and it was on the same day the world burned her home to ash. When the government learned how close O'Hara had come to the truth, it did not arrest them. It erased them. It called down a Buster Call, the most terrible weapon in its arsenal, a fleet of its mightiest admirals and warships with a single order: annihilate everything, leave nothing. The scholars of O'Hara tried, in their last moments, to save their life's work by sinking their library of forbidden books into the lake, and the head of the island, Professor Clover, tried to speak the truth they had found aloud to the world's leaders over a snail phone, and was shot dead. Mid-sentence, before he could say the one word that mattered, and the whole island, every scholar, every book, every soul, was bombarded into ash and sunk beneath the sea. Little Robin lived only because of a giant, a defected marine officer named Jaguar D. Saul, an enormous, laughing, good-hearted giant who had turned his back on the government precisely because he could not stomach what it did, had washed up on O'Hara and had befriended the lonely little girl in the days before the end. When the Buster Call came, Saul fought to get Robin onto a boat and away. And it was another marine who decided her fate, a young officer named Kuzan, the man the world would later know as the Admiral Aokiji, who was Saul's old friend and who, ordered to kill them both, froze Saul solid with his ice powers even as he wept to do it, and then, against every order, quietly let the little girl escape. Saul's last words to Robin, as the world burned around them, were the words she would carry, buried and disbelieved, for the next 20 years, that the sea is vast, vaster than she could imagine, and that somewhere out on it, no matter what the world told her, there would one day be people who wanted her, friends who would be glad she was alive. Live, he told her, laughing even then. Somewhere out there, someone will want you. Robin escaped O'Hara, an 8-year-old child with a bounty of 79 million on her head and the label Demon Child attached to her name. She spent the next 20 years running, hiding among criminals and revolutionaries and pirates, trusted by no one, betrayed by everyone, believing with her whole heart that Saul had been wrong, that there was no one in all the wide world who wanted her to live, and that the safest thing she could ever do for anyone she cared about was to leave them before her curse could reach them. For 20 years she had lived that belief out to the letter. She drifted from one dangerous crew to the next. Pirates, assassins, revolutionaries, anyone at all who could make use of a woman who could read forbidden stones. And every single time, without fail, it ended the same way. The people she traveled with either tried to sell her to the government for the fortune on her head or were destroyed for the crime of sheltering her. So she learned to betray others before they could betray her, to smile and give nothing away, to need no one and love no one, because loving a person was only a slower, crueler way of losing them. By the time she washed up among the Straw Hats, hidden, at first, inside the very organization that had tried to seize Alabasta, Miko Robin was one of the most capable and most tightly guarded people alive, a woman who had made a quiet, bitter peace with the certainty of dying alone. The one thing she had never once planned for was a crew too stubborn and too foolish to let her. That was the woman CP9 took to Ennies lobby. That was the woman who chose to die so 7 pirates could sail on without her. Getting to Ennies lobby at all should have been impossible. It sat behind the gates of justice, reachable only by the sea train across a sea whipped into a monstrous storm called the Aqua Laguna. The alliance that formed across it was an unlikely one. The Frankie family, who had robbed and beaten the Straw Hats only days before, threw in with them without reservation, roaring that they would not sit idle while the government dragged off their boss and the woman these pirates were bleeding to save. The shipwrights of Galley Law, who loved the wounded iceberg, lent their strength, and old Kokoro from the station, it turned out, could drive the sea train herself. So a second locomotive went thundering out across the storm-lashed ocean in pursuit of the first. A train packed with pirates and dismantlers and shipwrights, charging headlong into the teeth of the Aqua Laguna and the guns of the world to tear one woman back out of the jaws of her own execution. But Luffy did not leave people behind. Gathering what allies he could, the Frankie family who had wronged them, the shipwrights of Galley, Law who loved Iceberg, and a masked sharpshooter called Soga King who fought exactly like a certain long-nosed friend and fooled absolutely no one, the crew rode the sea train through the storm and threw themselves against the fortress of the world's justice to take their friend back. Ennies lobby was built to be unassailable. It stood on an island ringed by a bottomless waterfall, its great courthouse and its towering Tower of Justice defended by legions of Marines, and behind it loomed the Gates of Justice, vast doors that opened onto the government's deepest prison and its executioner's blade. To get in, the crew did the only thing they had ever known how to do. They hit it head-on all at once from the front. A handful of pirates and dismantlers and one masked sharpshooter charged an entire army. They blew the main gates open, they fought across a courtyard under a rain of cannon fire, and they carved a path, step by bloody step, toward the tower where a cruel little bureaucrat named Spandam was dragging Robin ever closer to the drawbridge that led to her death, taunting her the whole way. That no one in all the world was coming, and that no one ever would. And there, on a high balcony of the great Tower of Justice, with the whole weight of the world government arrayed against them, came the moment that defines this entire story. Robin, worn down and certain of her doom, called out to the crew across the gap and told them to stop, to leave her, to save themselves, that she was not worth it, that she had brought death to everyone she had ever loved and she would only bring it to them too. The cruel little bureaucrat holding her, a man named Spandam, laughed and told her the same thing the whole world had told her for 20 years, that no one would ever come for her, that she had no right to be saved, that she should simply disappear. Luffy's answer was not an argument. He had Sogeking climb the tower and take aim, not at a person, but at the enormous flag flying above the fortress, the mark of the world government itself, the symbol of every nation and every navy and every power on Earth. And he had him burn it, shoot it down and set it alight, there in front of the government's own stronghold, in full view of its assembled might. It was the single most reckless thing a pirate could possibly do, a literal, unmistakable declaration of war by 9 people against the entire world. And then Luffy told Robin the only thing he had ever needed to tell her. He and the crew had not come to hear that she wanted to be saved. They had come because they already loved her. But she had to be the one to say it. She had to want to live. If she truly wished to come back to the sea with them, she only had to say so, out loud for once in her life. And Robin, who had swallowed 20 years of grief, who had let herself be called a demon and a curse, who had been ready to walk quietly to her death rather than ask a single soul for help, finally broke. Weeping, screaming it out across the fortress of the world that had hunted her since she was a child, she said the words she had been forbidden and afraid to say her whole life. She wanted to live. She wanted to go back out to sea. She wanted them to take her with them. Saul had been right after all. Somewhere out on that vast sea, there had been people who wanted her alive, and they had just declared war on the world to prove it. It is hard to say, even now, which was the braver act. A crew of 9 setting fire to the flag of every nation on earth over the head of one hunted woman, or that one woman finally daring, after 20 years of silence, to say out loud that she wanted to keep living. For most of us, wanting to live is the most ordinary thing in the world. For Robin, it was the single hardest and most dangerous thing she had ever done, because it meant truly believing, really letting herself believe, that this time the people reaching out for her would not vanish, or sell her, or die for the crime of standing near her. She looked across that gap at 7 pirates who had just made themselves enemies of the entire world for her sake, and for the first time since a laughing giant set her on a boat and swore to her that the sea was big enough to hold her, she let herself believe it was true, and then she let them come and carry her home. What followed was a war. To reach Robin and carry her out, the Straw Hats had to break through the entire strength of CP9, one deadly assassin at a time, and every one of them was pushed further than they had ever gone. Zoro dueled a swordsman who had eaten a fruit that let him become a giraffe. Sanji fought a wolf-man of the government's own making. Nami turned her cleverness and her weather against a whip-cracking assassin, and Chopper pushed past his limits, transformed into a rampaging monster he could barely control. And a new ally joined them at last, the cyborg Frankie, freed and fighting on their side now, a shipwright with the soul of a brawler. Each of those duels became a story of its own. Zoro, locked against the giraffe-transforming swordsman Kaku, was pushed until he broke through into a whole new understanding of his blades. Sanji hunted the wolfish Jabra across the tower with a relentless storm of kicks. And Chopper, who had gulped down too much of his own risky medicine in a desperate bid to be strong enough to matter, lost himself entirely and became a raging, mindless monster, so terrible that his own friends had to bring him down before he destroyed everyone around him, a thing that frightened the gentle little doctor more than any enemy ever could. Nami finally turned her wits and her weather against the cruel, whip-cracking Khalifa, and the newly freed Frankie, and the masked Sogeking, who was fooling absolutely no one, threw themselves in beside the others. Every last one of them fought past the point of collapse, because on the far side of all of it was a woman who had, for the first time in her life, asked to be saved, and none of them were willing to be the reason she was proven right about the world. At the center of it stood Luffy against Rob Lucci, the strongest and coldest of CP9, and it was here, with everything on the line, that Luffy reached for power he had never shown before. He learned to pump his own blood faster to move at blinding speed, a technique he called Gear Second, and to inflate his own bones to strike with the force of a giant, a technique he called Gear Third. Even so, Lucci was very nearly too much for him, and the fight went to the very edge of Luffy's life before he finally, barely, brought the assassin down and pulled Robin free. But the government had one last horror ready. The little bureaucrat Spandam, panicking, called down a buster call upon Ennies lobby itself, the same annihilating fleet that had destroyed Ohara, with orders to wipe the entire island off the map, his own men and buildings and all, just to be certain the Straw Hats died with it. For Robin, watching those warships gather on the horizon, it was the end of the world happening to her a second time. This was the very same weapon that had erased Ohara and everyone she had ever loved when she was 8 years old, the same overwhelming fleet, the same cold order to leave nothing and no one standing. But this time was not like that time. This time she was not a lone child watching her family burn from the deck of a fleeing boat. This time an entire crew stood between her and the guns, refusing to run, bleeding to carry her out. The single worst nightmare of her whole life had come back for her, and this time, for the first time, she was not facing it alone. The great warships opened fire, and the island of Justice began to collapse into the sea in fire and thunder, with the crew and their rescued friend trapped in the middle of it, cut off, exhausted, and out of any way home. And it was here, before we say goodbye, that one more secret was quietly settled. Frankie, before he joined them, made sure of one thing: the ancient blueprints for the doomsday weapon, Pluton, which he alone had carried in his memory all these years, could never be used to burn the world. He destroyed them for good, so that terrible power would stay buried. The weapon at the heart of the whole conspiracy, the thing CP9 had killed for, went up in smoke by the hand of the man who could have built it. The escape was its own nightmare. The Buster Call's warships ringed the island and rained fire without pause. The ground split and buckled and sank beneath the crew's feet, and the Straw Hats, carrying a barely conscious Robin and dragging their own broken bodies, had no ship, no bridge, and no path across the churning rising. See, Spandam, the coward who had set the whole horror in motion, crawled away with the last of his strength, while the Marine's own commander watched the deliberate slaughter of an entire island with cold, procedural calm. By every measure that could be counted, there was no way out. The crew had won their friend back, fought the whole world to a standstill to do it, and were now about to die with her, together in the burning ruins of the world's justice. There was no way off that dying island. The crew stood trapped as the Buster Call tore Ennies' lobby apart around them, the sea itself rising, no ship in sight, no path home. And then, impossibly, one came. Sailing across the burning water toward them, alone, with no one at her helm, came the Going Mary. The little ship they had condemned, the ship whose spine was broken past all repair, the ship a heartbroken friend had tried to keep. She had come for them. There is an old sailor's belief that a ship which is truly loved, cared for and cherished over many long years and many thousands of miles, grows a small spirit of its own, a faithful little soul that watches over the crew and wishes only to carry them safely home. The Going Mary had been loved exactly like that, patched by Usopp's hands 100 times over, lived on and laughed on and slept on and bled on, carried in the crew's hearts from the very first island. And in their darkest moment, with the sea rising and the guns firing and every last hope gone, that faithful little spirit did the only thing it had ever wanted to do. Broken past all saving, on a sea no sound ship could have crossed, the Mary gathered herself together for one final voyage and came, alone, to carry her family up out of the fire, because that was what she was for, and because, in her own small wooden way, she loved them just as much as they had. Ever loved her. She should not have been able to move at all, and yet there she was, carrying herself across an impossible sea to rescue the crew who had loved her one last time. They climbed aboard, all of them, Robin among them at last, and the Going Mary carried her family out of the fire and away from the collapsing island, doing the one thing she had always done, bringing them home. It was the very last thing she ever did. On the far side, safe at last, the Mary finally gave out. Her wounds were beyond anything, and everyone aboard knew it. So the crew did the only right thing left to do. They gave their ship a proper farewell. They set her adrift, and they set her alight, a burning funeral on the open sea for the friend who had carried them from the first island to this one. And as the flames rose, the Going Mary spoke to them, the small, patient spirit of a ship that had been loved, and told them she was sorry. Sorry that she could not carry them any further, that she had wanted to take them so much farther than this, that being their ship and being cared for so gently for so long had made her happy, truly, deeply happy. Thank you, she told them as she burned. Thank you for taking such good care of me. And the whole crew, even Luffy, even Zoro, stood on the water and wept as their first ship went down in fire and light, and the argument between two friends over whether you throw family away when they are old and hurt was answered, at last, by the family itself: you do not. You carry them as far as they can go, and then you thank them, and you let them rest. And it was there, standing in the firelight over the water, that the wound between Usopp and the rest of them finally began to close. Watching the very ship he had fought his own captain to protect give up her life to save every one of them, Usopp understood at last what Luffy had understood on that first heartbreaking day in Water 7, that loving the Mary had never, ever meant refusing to let her go. He broke down completely, and he apologized, to the crew and to the ship both, for all of it, and no one held a moment of it against him. You do not when you are all standing together crying over the same lost friend. They came back to Water 7 broken-hearted and victorious, and slowly the wounds began to heal. There was a reconciliation first. Usopp, who had left the crew in anger and pride, now desperately wanted to come home, but was too proud and too ashamed to simply ask. He stood outside and shouted apologies into the night, and the crew, grinning through the awkwardness, made him grovel just enough to save his dignity before hauling him gratefully back aboard. The sniper had come home, and there was a new ship and a new friend. Frankie, the loud cyborg shipwright, took a legendary treasure, a piece of the sacred, near-indestructible atom wood, and, with the Straw Hat's Skypea gold in every ounce of his craft, built them the dream ship to end all dream ships, a great, bright, lion-headed vessel he named the 1000. Sunny, a ship built to sail to the very end of the world and back. He had not meant to build it for them, and he certainly had not meant to sail on it. But a ship like the 1000 Sunny is not really a thing at all. It is a promise and a home, and it needs a shipwright aboard to keep that promise alive across 1,000 miles of danger. The crew wanted him, and Frankie, who had spent 10 long years as a loud, lonely, self-made man insisting to everyone including himself that he needed nobody at all, finally ran clean out of ways to say no. There was a great deal of shouting about it, and a great deal of open weeping that he loudly insisted was absolutely not weeping, and in the end the cyborg shipwright climbed aboard the dream ship he had built with his own hands. But a crew needs a shipwright, and a shipwright who builds a ship like that belongs on it, and after a great deal of shouting and crying and pretending he didn't care, Frankie joined the Straw Hat Pirates, the 8th of their number. And there was one last bombshell, delivered with a laugh by a terrifying old man. A legendary marine hero named Garp, a man famous across the seas as the marine who had cornered the Pirate King himself, came strolling into Water 7 to visit Luffy and cheerfully dropped 2 secrets that turned the crew's world upside down. This towering government hero was Luffy's own grandfather, and the most wanted man in all the world, Monkey D. Dragon, the leader of the revolutionary army waging war against the world government. The mysterious stranger who had once saved Luffy's life in Loketown was Luffy's father. A marine legend, a revolutionary, and a boy who would be Pirate King. 3 generations of the same stubborn, world-shaking family on 3 different sides of the coming storm. There was warmth buried under the shock of that visit, too. Garp had brought along 2 young Marines the crew had met on their very first adventure, long ago. Kobe and Helmeppo, grown now into real soldiers, quiet proof that everyone's story had been moving forward all this time on every side of the law. And when the new bounties came down, they were not merely bigger numbers. They were the world formally recognizing the Straw Hats as something genuinely dangerous and real. Luffy's leapt to 300 million. The whole crew was marked now as a serious threat. But the poster that mattered most belonged to Nico Robin. For the first time in 20 years, her wanted poster did not list her as a lone demon child to be feared and hunted in the dark. It listed her as a member of a crew, one of Luffy's, one of theirs. She had spent 2 decades as someone the whole world wanted dead and not one soul wanted alive. Now, at last, she had a place, and a captain who would burn the flag of the world before he let her go, and a wanted poster that finally, after everything, put her name among friends. And that is where we will leave them for tonight. A woman who finally, after 20 years, let herself be saved. A sniper come home, a shipwright come aboard, and a little ship laid to rest in fire on the open sea, thanked and loved to the very end. Let's take a slow breath together and hold what this saga gave them. A city on the water and a secret buried under 800 years of silence. A friend who was ready to die alone rather than ask to be wanted, and a crew who burned the flag of the whole world just to tell her she already was. A giant's promise to a lonely little girl, kept at last by 7 strangers on the far side of her whole life, and a ship that could not be repaired and could not be replaced, who found the strength, somehow, to carry her family through fire one final time, and asked for nothing at the end but to say thank you. There is something in the going merry's goodbye worth carrying with you as you drift off, that the things we love are not machines to be discarded when they wear out, and that a proper farewell, freely given, is one of the kindest things there is. The haunted island of the living dead, the shadow of a great warlord, and a musician who has waited 50 years for a promise. All of that lies ahead of us in the chapters yet to come. But there is no need at all to rush toward any of it now. For tonight, simply let the crew rest on the deck of their bright new ship beneath a wide and quiet sky. 8 dreamers now, a little more hunted and a little more whole, carried softly forward by the very same old promise. Rest easy. The Grand Line will still be there, waiting when you wake.